Welcome to Conversations Live. For more than a decade, we've brought you the best in books, entertainment, and current events. When the movers and shakers of the world have something to say to you, they say it to us first. Now, here's your host, Cyrus Webb.
And welcome back, everyone, to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. Whether you're tuning in on the radio dial, we welcome you all back to our program. Also, those joining us through our online affiliates, including our iHeart family, we're glad to have all of you with us as well. We're excited to welcome Caroline Fraser to our program today. Caroline wrote a book that was released in 2017 that had everyone talking about someone who I think we all know who she is, and that is Laura Ingalls Wilder. The book is called Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder. And what you'll see in this book is that, just the person that we believe we know because of the Little House on the Prairie books and what we've seen on television really only scratches the surface of this woman and what she was able to achieve. We'll talk to Caroline not only about the writing of this book, but what it's been like for her to see the conversations that are taking place around it and what she hopes you're able to take away from it as well. Caroline, hello to you and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, look, the pleasure is definitely all mine. First of all, congratulations on this book. At the time we're having this conversation, the book has close to 120 reviews already on Amazon.com. And for authors who kind of struggle to get a few, that really says a lot about how excited people were about this book and what you were able to share. What has it been like for you, Caroline, to see the response to the book so far?
Oh, it's been really exciting. It is a really interesting time in the discussion about Laura Ingalls Wilder. There was a new edition of her memoir that came out a couple of years ago, and people were really interested in that. And I think that Prairie Fires has given people a chance to extend the story, really, because the memoir that was published about from earlier in her writing career takes us up to the day she got married, pretty much like the books themselves. But there's a whole story about the rest of her life, and I think people are responding to that and responding to the portrait of how historically important her life was, but also how difficult it was in terms of her relationship with her daughter and the real struggle that she had economically. So it's been really interesting to see people reacting to that who hadn't had a chance to know much about it before.
Right. I think that is so true. And I think the other thing that I think audiences will appreciate and probably already have, Caroline, is the fact that, as I mentioned in my introduction, I think there's some interesting parallels to today in that, when she kind of was finding her way, a lot of times, we think about the books, we think about, the television show, and, we think about how she was able to go through life, her profession and dealing with family and, of course, community, as we all do. I think there are so many people today who are saying, they still feel those struggles of being accepted in the workplace, being able to be taken seriously, and to be able to pay their own way. Has that been part of the modern-day conversation that you've been also enjoyed?
Yes, I think that one of the things that's so striking about how Wilder became a writer is that she really did serve a pretty long apprenticeship before she even came to write the books, which was relatively late in her life. She writes them when she's in her 60s. But before then, she had had to take on a lot of different, kind of odd jobs just to help support her family. Her husband had a physical disability, and they continued to be farmers, but they really needed to supplement their income. And so she really filled the gap by taking on various jobs, including writing a column for a farm newspaper, regional farm newspaper in the Midwest. And this was incredibly important to her evolution as a writer, to become comfortable in writing for an audience and writing even about her memories. She began exploring her childhood in that column. And I think readers do see a lot of, contemporary issues in her life, in part because she was a woman who was struggling to enter the workplace and find jobs that would pay her a living wage to help support her family. These are things that are, of course, still quite relevant.
For sure. You also express in the book how, and one of the things that I wanted to share with our audience that you talk about, especially during Laura's teen years, you wrote that she wrote poetry cheering herself up and egging herself on, and that she was able to really articulate in many ways, her feelings about things that were happening through words. I mean, what was it like for you to kind of look at and think about, because we hear authors talk about, I know I hear it a lot on this program, about writing what you know, how writing kind of becomes their voice. What was it like for you to see how she kind of found her own voice?
Oh, I think it's really kind of inspirational, because you see how even as a young person, she really found a resource, a personal resource in the books that her parents shared with her. I think that she grew up with a real respect for writing and for books. That was one of the ways that the family entertained themselves, was by reading to each other magazines and novels. And so the fact that she began writing poetry at such a young age, even in at a time and in a culture where it wasn't something that every young farm girl would do. It really gives you a sense of how she always had this ambition to be a writer, and began exploring that even as a teenager, and in fact wrote a little essay called Ambition in high school, which remained one of her most precious possessions.
Yeah. Sure, and I think that again goes to, how she was able to balance being the person that she was, and then being able to allow her expressions to come through in her words as well. Another great thing I think a lot of people can relate to. I want to say for those who are just tuning in, either on the radio side or online, you're listening to Conversations Live. We're excited to welcome to our program today Caroline Fraser. She's the author of the book called Prairie Fires: The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So let's go back a little bit, Caroline. What is it that made you say this was a story that I wanted to share?
Well, I'd been interested in Wilder all my life. I read her books as a kid, and I think I shared with a lot of readers the sense that, in a way, Laura's story was kind of my family story, because I came from, farmers and immigrants who settled in the Midwest. So I always had this sense that this was really, important territory for my family. I think lots of readers felt that when I became a writer myself and wrote about Laura as a writer. I began to think about ways in which she represented a really important moment in writing about the settlement of the frontier, and how she had become kind of an iconic figure representing the frontier to many millions of people all over the world. And eventually it just became clear to me as I was editing the Library of America's edition of the Little House books, how much of American history she represented, and how her life touched on all these amazing chapters, from, she's born right after the end of the Civil War and lives until 1957, which is the Eisenhower administration. So her life really covers this extraordinary territory in which you see the opening and closing of the American West. You see the Indian Wars on the plains. You see all the way through to the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression when she was writing these books. And that, in turn, colors a lot of what she's writing. So her life is really an extraordinary sweep of American history, and I think we can learn a lot by looking more specifically about at her real life, which was in some ways even more dramatic than the stories that she told.
Exactly, and I think that's it. And I think, too, the other thing that I thought was interesting about your book, Carolyn, is that it wasn't like this was a life that she necessarily would have chosen for herself. And, I think, that's the other side of this I thought was interesting that I never really thought about before. That, it wasn't as if, she said, oh, I just love this life. I love, the ruggedness of it. From what you kind of chronicle in the book, there were some times when she expressed her displeasure with having to live the life that she did, right?
Yes, there are some interesting examinations of the decision to be a farmer. I think that she both there were things about farming and homesteading that she loved. She loved the Great Plains. She loved that place, that wild landscape. But there were other things about it that she really did see how incredibly difficult it was for small farmers to succeed. And so looking back at her life when she writes a manuscript that wasn't published during her life but was published later in 1971 about the early years of her marriage, you really see her examining, whether it was smart to be a farmer and asking herself that question, and also just kind of despairing over many of the really tough choices that they had, and the struggles and challenges that nearly sunk them at various points. They went through so many hardships. They lost a child. They suffered this terrible illness that left her husband partially disabled, and then they lost their home to fire, and that eventually just drove them out of Dakota Territory, and they ended up living for most of their lives in the American South in Missouri.
Yeah, for sure. So I have to ask you about the surprises, Carolyn, for yourself. It's one thing to embark on this journey of telling this story. What was one of the things that surprised you the most that you learned about Laura?
Well, one of those things I was just mentioning, that she did live in the South, and I don't think that influenced her per se. She didn't ever really write about the South as an entity, but I do think, and this was a kind of a surprise to me, was to realize how that move must have affected her life, because it essentially was a kind of exile from both this place that she loved on the Great Plains and from her family. And I think that separation really drove her to revisit her childhood in the books and try to recapture them through that means. I also was really surprised at the degree to which her daughter influenced the evolution of the books. Her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, was a notable journalist, a kind of a yellow journalist of her day. And it was Rose who really pushed her mother to write down her memoirs and try to write these books. It was Rose who helped edit and shape them and got them published, because she was the one who had publishing connections in New York. So Rose plays a really powerful role in her mother's life and in the evolution of the Little House books. And I was surprised at the degree to which that was true, and the just the difficulty of the relationship between them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other side of that too is that it really shows for me, how, especially for Laura, and I guess it was something that was passed on to her daughter, her appreciation for learning. Whether it was in the classroom or outside the classroom, appreciating learning from life and being able to take in the world. Is that one of the things that you hope readers today take away from this book, Carolyn, the importance of appreciating the world around them and taking in as much as they can and sharing that with others?
Yes, the illustrator who did the wonderful illustrations for the Little House books in 1953, Garth Williams, would say that Laura never glamorized anything, but she did appreciate and loved the beauty of life, and was able to, I think, pass that on to her readers. She was constantly writing in this very lyrical way about the beauty of the Great Plains, the places where they traveled, and not emphasizing as much some of the economic struggles that they go through. I think that leaves you with a slightly rosier picture of what homesteading was all about. But it also is such a beautiful portrait of the time and the place. And I think that's what makes the books so important and lasting as part of our literature. So I do hope that readers come away from Prairie Fires with an understanding of how special this woman really was. She did continue, as you say, to learn all her life and to appreciate things in a way that I think is quite unusual for somebody who had been through the kind of real, difficulties and sort of nightmarish experiences that she had had. It's really extraordinary that she came away from those experiences able to love life and to pass that along to readers.
For sure. I think that is one of the amazing things. I also think another amazing thing, quite frankly, Caroline, is we're having this conversation today, that our audience is able to listen to us either through the radio dial or the podcast, and then actually turn on their television and watch Little House on the Prairie today. I mean, does it surprise you that this television series continues, even after all of these years, to captivate people's attention?
It is surprising because, when you look at the TV program today, I think it is so reminiscent of the 1970s. In fact, I think it's sort of more about the 1970s than it is about the 1870s, which it is, portraying. So it is, I think, a testament to how many people loved that show when it was on originally and continue to feel a kind of sense of warmth around the way the family was portrayed. And it wasn't always very accurate in a lot of ways. I don't think that Laura herself maybe would have appreciated the liberties that were taken, but it certainly does speak to a lot of people, not just in the U.S., but around the world, as to, what family is all about.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And what a great thing, as we are able to see also in your book for sure, Caroline. Again, everyone, we've been speaking today with Caroline Fraser. Great conversation with you, Caroline. The book is Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder. It's available now through our friends at Amazon.com. You all can get it there. And, Caroline, how can our audience stay connected with you?
Well, I have a website for the book, which is prairiefiresbook.com, and you can go there to read more about the book, to learn about the book, see some blog postings about some various little things that provide more information about certain people and places that are discussed in the book. So I hope you'll go and check that out.
All right, so prairiefiresbook.com is that website, so make sure you'll take advantage of that. Caroline, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to our next conversation together.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad to do it. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. If you all came in late and missed part of the conversation with Caroline, don't worry. Thanks to our online friends, you all can catch the replay right after we go off the air. The link is already available through our social media sites. So head over to Facebook.com/Cyrus Webb or go to Twitter.com/Cyrus Webb. If you click on the link there, you can listen to the show completely for free and share with your friends from there too. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying, as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Make sure you take out time to enjoy some good music as well as a great book. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live today. You all make it a great one.